All right, welcome back to Module 6. This is HTML5 Application Development Fundamentals, and I'm Cullen. We're going to dive in right now to managing text flow by using CSS, okay? Go ahead and get started here. All right, we're going to cover Objective 3.3, manage the flow of text content by using CSS. In doing that, we're going to focus on CSS regions, columns, and hyphenation, and then also CSS exclusions. Got a couple of great demos for you too to show you the power of each of those things. So we'll get started with CSS regions. So with HTML, you can organize content into separate sections, but what can you do if you want content to flow from one region to another? And the answer to this is CSS regions. There's sections of a document where content can flow, right? So if we got region 1, let me go ahead and pull up a pen here. If I've got, whoops, sorry guys. Okay, if I've got region 1 here, I have a bunch of content that flows through region 1. Well, let's say that I want that content to wrap and come over here to region 2. But let's say there's so much content in region 2, I want it to wrap over to region 3 as well. Well, I can do that with CSS regions, and they can be placed anywhere on a screen, as evidenced by this graphic here, which makes them that much cooler. All right, so you can implement CSS regions by using the flow into and flow from properties. Before you can do that though, you have to specify a content source and then also content containers. So here, if you take a look at the code example down below, a content source is actually going to be a separate HTML file. And this can be kind of confusing, so I'll show you what I mean by that in a demo. But we're actually going to pull content directly from another HTML file into this one. And from there, we're going to put it into each of these different regions, right? So these right here are our content containers, right? They're the areas where you want your content to appear. And you should definitely, once again, use a separate HTML document for your content. It'll make your life so much easier. All right, so how do we use these flow from and flow into properties? What we're going to do is we're going to use an ID as a selector for our content, right, for that div. And then we're going to use the flow into property and set the value as main. Then for each of our regions, we're going to identify them with a class, right? And from there, we're going to use flow from. Now we're going to set that flow from properties value to main as well. And these two things here, for our region and for our content, are going to be the same exact value. Okay? This is how the source and the content are associated with each other and how we make sure that it flows into and it flows from the same place, or rather the specified place. In this case, it's main. And then just a couple of quick lines for our demo code here. Background, we set it as gray, if I recall correctly. I don't know if that is actually the hexadecimal for gray, but we've got our width and our height are just 150 pixels by 200 pixels. We're floating each of our regions to the left, and then our margin, there's a little bit of buffer space between each of our regions, okay? Another quick note too, we had talked about overflowed text as well. It's really important that you guys understand how this works with CSS regions. For me, it wasn't rendering properly on this browser when I tried it earlier, and sometimes it doesn't, even if you do use the vendor prefixes. And there's some conflicting information out there about what to use and how to use overflow versus the region fragment. The region fragment property. So just make sure that you do a quick Bing search, discern what kind of information is good, check the Microsoft Developer Network, and make a really good educated decision. And of course, do my favorite thing to learn, experiment, 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 and you'll get it right. Try all sorts of different browsers, and you'll definitely make sure that you have visible overflow if necessary, or you can even set it to truncate the text too, okay? Another thing that you can do is also just cut off, just allow the height of each of the regions to be set automatically so that you don't have overflow, okay? So moving on, another quick quick thing to point out is that with Internet Explorer, you're actually going to implement CSS regions differently than how you would for other browsers like Firefox or a Google Chrome. Okay, we're going to use the iframe tag, and so note here that I'm using iframes. Everything else is very, very, very similar to our example here, except here we use divs. Okay, all that we're doing is just changing those tags. Everything else is the exact same. Okay, yeah, nothing changes at all. So let's go ahead and take a look at CSS regions in action and run over to a quick demo here. Okay, all this code, of course, is included inside of the slideshow, so you can go ahead and take a look at that on your own time. Unfortunately, I have it listed as overflow examples, so we'll update that so when you download it, these slides are all correct. Okay. All right, let's pull up Web Matrix. We'll take a quick look at our code for regions. Note exactly as I had mentioned with the iframe here, I've got 4 different regions, right? They're all assigned the region class, so keep that in mind. What I've done here is exactly like what we had previously discussed as well, so no surprises. I will show you though that we've got content HTML. I'm going to show you that HTML page, right? So here we have this HTML document. I just used lorem ipsum text. And note, same structure as your typical HTML document. All content is included inside the body tags. But what we're going to do is we're going to import all of this content into our regions, and so it's pretty cool to check out. Let's do it. Let's go ahead and launch it in the browser, and there you'll see we have 4 columns of our text. We set it as float early, so each of the regions are going to go ahead and drop down to a next line when we decrease the size of our browser window, right? When they run out of room, and let's see here if that content was truncated at all. Of course, with the lorem ipsum text, we are going to have some challenges in determining whether or not the text got truncated, and it definitely looks like it did, right? Here it is, it got cut off and it's hidden. So let's take a look at that now. We have region fragment set, and I apologize here, I'm going to resize my window for you. We have region fragment set as auto, so it should automatically handle the situation for us since we have overflow set as visible, but unfortunately it's not. So like I had mentioned earlier, sometimes you're going to swing and miss and things aren't going to render properly, and that's okay. It's part of being on the cutting edge of HTML5 and CSS3, and so just keep trying at it, stay updated, and check out the Microsoft Developer Network if you're having any trouble. All right, we'll head back to our presentation now. Let's talk about columns and hyphenation. So columns and hyphenation are, well, rather columns are pretty similar to regions, except we're just creating a multi-column layout, right? We've got 3 primary CSS properties that are used in order to manipulate columns. We have our column count, we have our column gap, and then we have our column rule. In the CSS box, columns are between the content and the box, right? And so what we're saying is a column would be, column would be here and here, right? All right, so a couple of column properties that are really important to review along with their values. There's break after, break before, break inside, column count, column fill, column gap. Column count is the one that we're going to be using right now. You can also fill the columns sequentially, right? So column fill is useful for that. We also want to go ahead and make sure that we pay attention to all the ones posted here with the column rule. We've got column rule color, which will specify the color of the rule between the columns and whether or not there's a line, sort of like the the red one that I drew earlier, right? And finally, column width and then columns. Columns is shorthand for setting the column count and the column width. All right, so let's take a look at how we would use hyphenation, and then we'll get on to a demo here. So when you're using columns, you want the text to cover the entirety of a column versus having words wrap around to the next line, right? If you want that to be the case, then you can enable hyphenation. Hyphenation is simply just the process of using a hyphen, connecting two parts of the same word based on their syllables, right? Implement hyphenation, you just use the hyphens property along with three different values, and you have auto, manual, or none. Auto and manual will enable hyphenation, and then none would prevent it, right? So here I just went ahead and set it as auto. Notice that I use the vendor prefixes for everything along with hyphens itself in case a prefix isn't needed. One thing to note though about using hyphens is that if you want your text to automatically be hyphenated, you need to set the language in your browser, or sorry, not in your browser, but in your HTML document. And you just do that inside of the HTML tag with the lang attribute. For English, just set the value to EN. You can go ahead and just do a quick Bing search if you're looking to set it up for any other languages. That's the best, quickest, and most efficient way that I've found if I want to set my browser or my HTML language to French, or even to, I think Pirate English is also available if I'm not mistaken. I might be though. It's been a while since I've tried to use that for my HTML documents. So, all right, let's take a quick look at columns in action, right? Let's do a quick demo here. And take this full screen. All right, so notice we've got a three columns class. Then we also have hyphenize is our class for anything that we want to have hyphens. We're going to take a quick gander here. So we have three columns. We've just set up a single div. It has two children elements inside of it. Both paragraph elements, right, with our lorem ipsum text. And what we've done is we've applied the three columns class and the hyphenized class to both, or rather to this div. And so note with three columns, we get a width of 300 pixels for each column, right? Then we have the column count. Actually, I need to change that to MS. Right, for our Microsoft browser. We may not even need the prefix, but I just realized that we're using Internet Explorer and not Chrome. And so we set our column count to 3, right, because we're making a web page with 3 columns. Same thing with column count there. And finally, for hyphenize, what we've done is we've just set the value of hyphens, the hyphens property, to auto. Okay. Go ahead and launch that in the browser here, and there we go. We've got 3 columns. There's no height, so of course the text is going to run all the way to the end there. You see our break right here between our different paragraph elements. But all that content has just fit inside of 3 different columns. And of course we can change the width of the columns or even set the height. But then of course we may have to worry about overflow. So what happens if we change, let's get rid of width and just do a quick little experimentation here. All right. Whoops. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to refresh the browser. And all of a sudden, notice that all of our content is just automatically sized, right? So we just said 3 columns no matter how wide the browser is, which is pretty darn cool. I like it. Notice our hyphens are still there. Very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. All right, so let's go back to our presentation here. We're going to talk about CSS exclusions. Now, I had a problem with running the demo for this earlier, so we're probably going to skip it in this presentation, but I will point you to some really helpful information that you can use and access to experiment with CSS exclusions. An exclusion is commonly referred to as a position float, and I probably should have bolded the terms position float, right? It allows you to place an element in a specific location on a web page. So what we do is, let's say we have this blue rectangle right here, right? And I want to just place it smack dab in the center of my my web page. what happens then is that all of the text that's on the page and any other elements will wrap around it. And so you notice you have the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. So we're still all on the same line here with our text, but it's just simply wrapping around this blue rectangle. Exclusions can be created in a ton of different shapes too. They can be in circles, triangles, all sorts of things. Here, I just picked a rectangle because I really like saying rectangle. No, I'm just joking. I have no idea why I picked a rectangle. Probably because it was the example that was given by the Microsoft Developer Network. Another plug for their site. All right. You can declare an exclusion by using the wrap flow property, featured right there. And its preferred value. So we said both, right? That makes sure that there's wrap around each side of it, each side of the element. You can modify the shape using the shape outside and shape inside properties. I didn't choose to do that here in this particular example code, but it's important to note that an exclusion may not be supported by all browsers, so I'm still using my vendor prefixes, right? So I still use the Microsoft vendor prefix. So keep that in mind. You always want to make sure that we do everything that we can to make sure that our web pages and our apps render properly in browsers. All right, so quick overview of all the properties for CSS exclusions. And really what I'm going to do here is just tell you to go ahead and download this presentation to go ahead and review them. They very well may be tested on the HTML application development fundamentals exam. So it's really important to take a good hard look at them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and point you to that Microsoft Developer Network article on CSS exclusions. Take a look right here. There's that image that I pulled from. But you can go ahead and read much more about the exclusion element. Pretty fun stuff, pretty interesting, and definitely a really neat feature to add to your user interface. So check that out. That's all we've got for this module. Quick recap. You've learned about CSS regions. We've learned about how to implement columns and hyphenation. And also we talked about CSS exclusions. Hope to see you guys again for our next module real soon. And, keep learning.